we've finished the idea of the stories of the exiles who returned to Jerusalem here on Route 66. But as we enter into Esther, what we discover is the story behind those that did not go with that group of people, the ones that decided to stay. And we get our theme out of that because Esther teaches us that even when God seems to be absent, he is present. Now, we're not exactly sure who the author of Esther is. It potentially could have been her uncle Mordecai. There's a little tendency to maybe lean that direction in the 10 chapters. But the unique factor that comes out of the book of Esther is this. At no point in this entire book is the name of God mentioned. And I know a lot of people that right now they're going, I don't know about that. It's true. Not one point is the actual name of God mentioned. And a lot of people think, oh, but what about, when Mordecai's telling Esther, if you don't do this, then, God will send some. No. Mordecai said, someone from somewhere, from someplace, help will come if you don't do it. It's an interesting and unique twist that comes with this book, and we'll get into that. Key verses are 4:14 and 4:16. And since the book is really about the Jews, that's the key word. And the structure is that there's a danger to the Jews first, and then there's Esther's selection to queen and Haman's plot that unfolds. Then there's the deliverance that happens, Mordecai's triumph in it, and then Israel's victory over Haman's plot. Now, we're about 480 BC here. Jerusalem and its people, and everything, they're kind of part of a province of the greater world power at that time, Persia. And the king, which, he has a couple of different names depending on the translation you're looking at. Ahasuerus is probably the most prominent, but you may know him as Xerxes. Xerxes is the king and ruler at this time in Persia. And world history is really starting to unfold at this time. We're seeing a lot of powerhouse history come into play. Though Persia is the world power, Rome right now is slowly growing itself and gaining its power stronger and stronger. The age of philosophy is being born with Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. History also projects this time with Persia to a very specific battle that you may be familiar with between Persia and Greece that involved this little town called Sparta. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you know it because of the film that was made, The 300. And that's actually unfolding during this time. In fact, amidst all of this is the story of Esther. And that story actually occurs just before the battle of the 300 would occur. So we're going to be doing a large amount of reading, as I said. So consider this book, to try and make it a little bit easier to follow, consider this to play out kind of like a television show. Okay? One season of a television show. And episode 1 is chapter 1. And this is the setting. And it goes something like this. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media, the nobles, the governors, the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and splendor and pomp of his greatness. For 180 days he puts on this banquet, showing how great and mighty his kingdom and power is. And then when those days were completed, the king gave a feast for all of the people. So now that's over, and for 7 more days, in the court of the garden, he gives one for all the people. Drinks were served in golden vessels of different kinds. The royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded, "Bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown." This was in order to show the peoples and princes her beauty. See, Vashti was gorgeous, and he wanted to show her off. He'd already shown off everything else. Now he's got all the people and everybody else, and so he says, all right, here we go. Here we go. I'm going to show you something even greater. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command. At this, the king became enraged. The king said, "What's to be done?" And so his advisors all get together, and they say, "If it pleases the king, let the royal order go out from him. Let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti is never again to come before the king. Let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she." And the king was pleased with the advice, and so he did exactly as his advisors told him he should do. He basically banished Vashti from his presence, stripped her of her royal title as queen, and was going to inset somebody new into that position. Now, it's after this celebration and Vashti being deposed, and the splendor of it is all fought for in this battle with Greece. And Persia goes against Greece, and Sparta fights with Greece, and the Battle of the 300 happens. Now, that completes in that part of history, and Xerxes and everybody is back in Persia. They're celebrating now the fact that this victory has been won, and now they're really, truly the world power. And episode 2 takes place, the placement. They return. They're victorious. But then the king remembers, oh yeah, Vashti disobeyed me. So they're like, okay, we got to do something to cheer him up. We got to do something to lift his spirits. And so a proposal and placement of a new king. Chapter 2, after these things, the king's young men who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. Gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa and the citadel. Let their cosmetics be given them. Let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. Well, the king thought, that sounds pretty good. Let's do that. Now, there was a Jew in Susa, and the citadel, his name was Mordecai. He had been carried away from Jerusalem along with the captives whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, or that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure, was lovely to look at, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So her parents died, Mordecai took her in, he's raised her. Esther was also taken to the king's palace, put in the custody of Hegai, who charged of the women, and the young women pleased him and won his favor. He quickly provided her with her cosmetics, her portion of food. He chose 7 young women from the king's palace. He advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. So he was like, this Esther girl, she's awesome. She is obviously better than the rest. I'm going to lift her up, put her into a better place. The king is definitely going to like this one. Now Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. So Mordecai was checking in on her. Every day he wanted to know. He wanted to make sure that she was being taken care of and how things were going. When Esther was taken to the king into his royal palace in the 10th month, he loved Esther more than all the other women. So he set the royal crown on her head. He made her queen. Then he gave a great feast for all his officials and servants, and it was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. This guy's so in love. He's loving Esther so much. He's so enthralled with her. He just gave everybody a tax break and lavished them with gifts. I'm kind of liking this guy. What do you think? In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, 2 of the king's guards became angry and sought to lay hands on the king. This came to the knowledge of Mordecai. And so Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. And when the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows. So now Esther's been made queen. Now Mordecai saved the king's life. We're off and running. So there has to be opposition. Good things are happening. So there has to be opposition. Episode 3 comes into play. The plot. After these things, the king promoted Haman, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his throne above the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. You know, we should try something. Every time I say Esther, you should cheer. Every time I say Haman, you should go boo. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. This is one of those times when you're going, how is God not in the picture in this? How is his name not mentioned? I mean, Mordecai knows he shouldn't bow to this guy because he obviously serves something greater than that. So you'd expect, this is one of those places where you're going, I don't get it. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage, he was filled with fury, and he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they'd made known to him the people of Mordecai, so in other words, Haman had wondered, and they said, yeah, Mordecai is a Jew. He's part of the Jews. Haman decided, I'm going to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom. Destruction of the Jews through one man's hate. Sounds eerily familiar. Then Haman said to the king, there's a certain people scattered abroad. The plot becomes afoot. Dispersed among the peoples in the province of your kingdom. Their laws are different from every other people. They do not keep the king's laws. so that it is not the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. Oh, and here's the real brown-nosing. And I'm going to pay 10,000 talents of silver, that they may put it into your king's treasuries. Man, yeah, total brown-noser. This guy was he was all about trying to be teacher's pet in this instance. And here's another, again, no mention of God, yet he recognizes that their laws are different. They serve a different purpose. They don't necessarily follow the king's laws. Well, due to that, you can imagine the king going, wait, they don't follow me? I'm not like the highest on the totem pole to them? Well, okay, so he takes his signet ring, plus he's thinking, ooh, 10,000 talents from you, Haman, I appreciate that. And he allowed this to happen. He made the decree, and he put his signet ring on it with Haman and said, the money's given to you, the people also, to do as it seems good to you. And then letters were sent to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, to kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th of the 12th month, and to plunder all their goods. Okay, so what now? What now? A royal decree has been made for their destruction. And if you know anything about history, when it came to royal decrees under the Medes and the Medes and the Persians, wow, I can speak this morning. There was no repealing this. When it was done, and they held to it in stone. So how do you defend against a king's decree and the guy who's like his second in command that's helping make this happen? Well, there has to be a response to the plot. There has to be an understanding of what's going on, and that's episode 4, chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth and ashes. He went out in the midst of the city. He cried with a loud and bitter cry. Again, I'm going, okay, if he's doing this, is this not, where's the statement that, and he prayed to God, where is it? Where is it? It seems apparent that would make sense, but it's not there. And in every province, wherever the king's commanded decree reached, there was mourning among the Jews. They fasted, they wept, they lamented, they did sackcloth and ashes as well. And then Esther, she called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who'd been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai. She needed to learn what this was. Here the queen doesn't know what's going on. And Mordecai tells the eunuch everything that's happened, and the exact sum of money that Haman said he's going to pay the king's treasury because of the destruction. And Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree. That way he could pass that along to her, that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and command her to go to the king, beg his favor, and plead with him on behalf of her people. So Esther responds to this. All the king's servants, the people, and the king's provinces know that if anyone goes to the king in the inner court without being called, there's only one law, death. Anyone who goes if they're not called, they're put to death, unless he holds out that golden scepter. And if he does that, then they'll live. But I haven't been called to the king in 30 days. You want me to go unannounced, unattended, when I haven't been there for 30 days, in hopes that he's going to receive me. And here we get to our key verse this morning. Mordecai's response to her, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Now, that's the major area. Where's God being mentioned right there? Seriously. Deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. Why can't you just say, hey, guess what? God is going to do something if you don't, but he's willing to use you. I feel like that's what should have been said, but even though it wasn't said, Esther says, okay, Mordecai, go gather all the Jews. Hold a fast on my behalf. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will do it with you, and then I will go to the king, even though it's against the law, and if I perish, but I'll try. She says, I'll try. There's a weight and a burden here. She's got about a 50-50 shot. Would you take it? Would you take the 50-50 odds and attempt to do that? Let's just say it's your entire family that are bent on being destroyed by somebody, and there is somebody that can save you from it. You got a 50-50 shot that they'll say yes or no. Do you go and try? So there's there's a response to it, so now we have the rescue plan that has to be put in place. That's episode 5, the rescue plan. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes. King was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room opposite the entrance to his palace. When he saw her, she won favor in his sight, and he held out the golden scepter. Esther approached and touched it. The king said to her, "What is it? What's your request?" She said, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come to a feast I've prepared." King said, "Bring Haman quickly, so we do as Esther asked." So the king and Haman, they came to the feast that Esther prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, "All right, what is it you wish? It's going to be granted you. What's your request? Even up to half my kingdom will be granted to you if that's what you want." She said, my request, if I found favor, if it pleases the king to grant my wish and my request, let the king and Haman come to a feast again that I'll prepare tomorrow. And I will do then as the king has said. Esther gets it, right, guys? The weight of the king's heart is through his stomach. She gets it. She's figured this out. And the funny part is, Haman, his response in this, he went away that day joyful and glad of heart. But then he saw Mordecai again at the king's gate. And Mordecai didn't rise or tremble before him. He didn't bow before him. And he was filled with wrath again for Mordecai. Then Haman's wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Hey, you should build a 75-foot high gallows in the morning. Then you can have Mordecai hanged on that. Everybody will see that. They'll be able to see that for miles. Then go joyfully to the king and to the feast." Think about the high spirits you'll be in if you get rid of Mordecai ahead of the game. And it pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. So now within the rescue plan that Esther's trying, the plot has begun to thicken. Haman obviously just assumes that he's got everything in hand. He's at the top of his game right now. He thinks everything's just going beautifully. But then a twist he doesn't see coming in episode 6. The honor that is bestowed upon Esther and the question that she presents. And this is episode 6. On that night, so they've had the feast. Haman's built the gallows. And on that night, the king can't sleep. The king can't sleep. He gives orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had saved him, told him about the 2 guards that were going to kill him. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this?" And they told him, "Nothing. We didn't do anything for him." And the king's kind of taken back, and he said, "Who's in the court right now? Who's here?" And Haman had just gotten there. And so they said, "Haman's here. He's standing in the court." And the king said, "Bring him to me." And he looks at Haman and he goes, "Hey, what do you think should be done to the man who the king delights to honor?" Well, we know the state that Haman's in, and so his thought is, who could the king want to delight more in than me? Everything I've done. I mean, this is awesome. He's asking me about how I should be honored. So his assumptions create a pride that makes him utterly giddy. And so he says, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal robes be brought, which the king himself has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor. Let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And then the humbling and probably humiliating twist is revealed. The king looks at Haman overjoyed and says, hurry, take the robes and the horse as you've said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you've mentioned. I'm sorry. God's sense of humor is really good. So Haman took the robes, the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, this shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. This is what's done for the man whom the king delights to honor. Can you imagine how Haman felt in that moment, doing that to the one man he hated with more passion than anybody else? In the midst of his power-grabbing plan, honor is brought to that one person he can't stand, and it only makes the outcome of episode 7 better. Episode 7, the truth revealed. So the king and Haman went into a feast with Queen Esther. The second day, as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king again said, what's your wish? My dear queen, it shall be granted you. What's your request? Even if it's half the kingdom. it'll be granted to you." And the queen answered, "If I found favor in your sight, if it pleases you, my king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we've been sold, I and my people, be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated." And the king, obviously stunned by this, says, "Who is he? Where is he? Who is the man who would dare to do this? Who in the world would put me up to this?" And Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, this wicked Haman." So Haman's sitting there in the presence feasting. He's probably got a mouthful of really good food, and you can just imagine it just, there it goes. And oh no, what is going to happen? The king was so taken by this that he arose, and in his wrath and wondering, he went out into the garden. He couldn't even stand to be in the presence. Then he was just writhing in anger. And Haman, he stayed to beg for his life. He's groveling on the couch next to Esther saying, I need my life. Please, please, please save my life. I'm so sorry. And the king returns and he sees this happening. And his response is, "Will he even assault my queen in my presence, in my own house?" And as that word left the mouth of the king, Haman's face was covered. And they said, "Moreover, the gallows that Haman's prepared for Mordecai, whose word saved the king, is standing at Haman's house, 75 feet high." And in that cruel twist of irony, the king says, "Hang him on that." And they hanged him on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. And then the wrath of the king abated. That's a 180-degree twist in the storyline here. And there might be a lesson, I don't know, there might be a little lesson about reaping what you sow here. Just a little one. But maybe that's a whole other message, because this is a setup for the series finale. This is a setup to end this. In this show and story, we're not disappointed at all in the finale of salvation and retribution. Because remember, you can't reverse a royal decree, but you can counteract it with another one. So the king tells Esther and Mordecai, "Guys, write another one. I'll sign it." And so they did so, and on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. They got relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of those who hated them, and it became a day of feasting and rejoicing, the Feast of Purim. And then on top of that, where Haman sat, Mordecai is elevated. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to the king. More than just a story and more than just a part of history, the key that we need to embrace from the book of Esther, the book of Esther that just makes it so unique is that strange factor. That unique factor that the name of God isn't actually mentioned anywhere throughout the book. And some have wanted to claim that it's inferior due to this fact. However, it actually might present us with two very incredible truths about our great God. It's a snapshot of the Israelite community that chose to remain in Persia rather than go back to Jerusalem after the exile. I mean, we can only imagine that it was probably God's desire and his will that Jerusalem be rebuilt, that the temple be rebuilt, because he spoke directly into the lives of the men who went back to do that so that they could restore the glory. You could argue that his will was in the fact that they would return. But this group, they seem to stay because of their comfort and prosperity in Persia. And we don't see them pray or speak his name, even when it would seem natural to do so. It makes you wonder, could the name of God departed with those who went back to the promised land? And those who remained, they chose to stop naming. They chose to stop hearing. Whoever the author may be, they may be asking some very powerful questions in this. What is God's relationship to his people when they get like this? What is it when they're outside what his intended will may be and when they don't call on his name? Do we know anybody like that? Can you think of anybody you know that might be like that? At one time, they were fully invested. They trusted in God. They had that salvation. They spoke heartily. They prayed deeply. But now, for some reason, his name is no longer mentioned by them. They don't pray. And honestly, you wonder if they've forgotten completely. These people, what's God's relationship to them? And Esther answers it in a powerful way, because those people did at one point sit within that position. Esther answers it again, the theme. Even when God seems to be absent, he is present. I think of it this way. Ren loves building Legos at home. And he is the creator of these things. He crafts it and builds it and takes different pieces to create what he's going to make. And he designs something, whether it's a building or a vehicle or some sort of device that he's going to use. And he creates that, but it's not like he can crawl down inside it afterwards, right? He changes things from the outside. He molds it. He's invested in it. He's a part of what's going on, but he's not actually making himself completely known to the little Lego people who will actually get the opportunity to use it. So consider this. Vashti just happens to decide not to go to the king when she's called. She decides to disobey his command. So because of that, hundreds or maybe even thousands of women are given the opportunity to replace her, but only one is chosen. That one particular one that's chosen just happens to be this nice little Jewish girl. Then Mordecai just happens to be in the right place at the right time to save the king's life. Haman develops this plot, but Esther, through immense courage, responds, but then decides she needs a second feast. And in the time between that feast, Haman decides he's going to build a giant gallows and further the plot. But then the king can't sleep, and he needs to make right and honor, and he honors the man that Haman wants to destroy. Do we really think this is all just coincidence? Do you think people maybe watched Haman on his gallows after he was hung on them and swinging? Do you think some of the people went, man, those Jews sure are lucky? So you figured it out. Oh, it's not the luck of the Irish, it's the luck of the Jews. I don't know that they did that. And I think that you can see the truths. I think there's truths that are directly taught within this book. And the first one is that our God is a God of providence. He's always working to protect his people. He's always present. Think about it. In the Great Commission in Matthew, Jesus himself said, "Surely I am with you always to the end of the age." Surely I'm with you always. In Deuteronomy, he revisited, when they were telling the law, Moses revisited and reminded the people that he said, "I will never leave you. I will never forsake you." Our God is a God of providence, always working to protect his people. And it's that character of God and our connection to him. Paul addresses this when he talks to Timothy. He says, "This saying is trustworthy, for if we've died with him, we also live with him. If we endure, we will also reign with him. If we deny him, he also will deny us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful." There's the difference. Why? For he cannot deny himself. God, even when he may seem absent, is present because he cannot deny himself. Now, I don't want to sound casual or cavalier here, because we may be talking about a specific who when we talk about this, and so I don't want to sound casual. We're not talking about that kid who was dragged to church his entire life. We're not talking about the people who may be still battling and debating and are confused about how salvation is supposed to work. We're talking specifically about the people who had that change happen in their life. They understood it at one point. They were invested in it at one point. But then something distracted them. Something distracted them away from that truth. It pulled them away. And the list of what that can be for us is obviously endless, because we can make anything in our life an idol. Idolatry is easy when it comes to anything in our life. But this character trait, this truth about God, this idea that even when we're faithless, he remains faithful, this idea of him not being able to deny himself, in these moments, it should break us, and a lot of times it does. It should cause us to question, how could you stay away? How could you walk away from a God that is so faithful, that provides, that is Jehovah Jireh, that is Jehovah Rophi, the great healer, that has a name for anything and everything that we could possibly need? The premise should resound in our prayers over these people. When we want to go to him with this, we should have a profound thanks that he still watches over them. Go in a profound thanks, but then there's heartfelt request that he is going to continue to work in them to draw them back to himself in the way that they once were. And Esther is amazing in the representation of this. Even when his name is not mentioned, there is a clear providence of God in this. But another truth, maybe even more mind-blowing than that one, is this, that our God is a God of prophecy. And he's always working to exalt his Son. This is an interesting one because you may have people ask, as many may do, wait, I don't get this. How is the book of Esther relevant to the idea of Jesus? How in the world is the book of Esther relevant to the idea of Jesus? Well, look back at the book of Esther. Okay, look at this part here in chapter 10. And all the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honor of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to king. He was great among the Jews, popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people. It's a pretty detailed description. Let's break this into a literal translation. If you take that Hebrew, you give literal translation, it says, he was great among the Jews, in favor with and esteemed by many kinsmen, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all his descendants. Does that sound like anybody? Does that sound like it describes anybody other than Mordecai that we may know in this great Word of God? The potential here is this. Esther is one of, if not the actual last book in chronological order of the Old Testament, as far as when it was written. So when people get a hold of this, when the people would get a hold of this and read this, they would light up. They would light up inside and out as they read this and as it came to light and they started to understand, because at this point in history when this story occurs, the prophets have already spoken to the people of the coming Messiah. Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, they've already prophesied to the people at this point of the coming Messiah. And the people read of Mordecai, a Jew, given honor and place of status, and they think, oh, hey, we know another one who's going to be coming soon that's going to be greater than even this, second only to the King of Kings, seeking the good of his people and also bringing peace. The author may be giving us a greater picture here than we understand. He gets them and he gets us to the end of the story, and then he says, hey, maybe Mordecai is more than just Mordecai. Maybe you should go back and read that again. There's more there than what you saw the first time. And others in the book, maybe they're more than who they appear to. Think about it the same way that we just did with Mordecai. Let's look at Haman. Boo. He hates Mordecai. He actually hates all of Mordecai's people as well. But in the end, he's defeated by Mordecai. He's replaced by Mordecai. Does this remind you, does Haman remind you of anybody in the scripture? There's no coincidence that in Hebrew numerology, do you know what Haman adds up to? I'll give you a hint. It's 3 digits and they're all the same. In Hebrew numerology, Haman adds up to 666. Because Haman represents the great enemy of God's people. Satan hates the Messiah, thus he hates his people. He's going to be defeated by the Son of God, by Jesus himself, as if he hasn't already been defeated by the cross and the resurrection, even though he doesn't want to admit it. And Jesus is going to replace him. See, because at creation, Lucifer was created to sit at the right hand of God and to be within his glory. And now Jesus sits at the right hand of God in the display of his glory. How about our leading lady? How about Esther? Beauty beyond description. A pure bride. The chosen one. It's the people of God. It's Israel. And Esther is beloved by her king. Israel is beloved by its king. Therefore, her enemies on both fronts will never hope to prevail. See, our God is a God of providence, always working to protect his people. And even more powerful than that is that our God is a God of prophecy, always working to exalt the glory of his Son. We can see the entire message of the Old Testament played out in this one book. A nation chosen and favored by its king, hated by the enemy then defeated, and the Savior exalted to the right hand of the great king. Through this book and before us, the king would desire to greatly exalt his Son. Jesus even declared it on the road to Emmaus, and this is where the idea of a God of prophecy exalting his Son. In John chapter 5, Jesus told his disciples on the road to Emmaus, he said, "Search the Scriptures, they testify of me." Search the Scriptures, they testify of me. In this book and all the books, as we continue along the Route of 66, they declare the beauty and the glory of Jesus Christ. And each stop, each stretch of highway calls us. It calls us to repentance, to redemption, to forgiveness, to that real relationship with God, to be drawn back so that in those times when we think that God is absent, we are reminded that he is always present. Because he never leaves us. He never forsakes us. His love never fails. It never gives up. And it will never run out on us.